two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Shimon Edelman, a Cornell psychology professor, and Lisa Levey, a Cornell alumna. They are both involved with what I think is a new organization called Cornell on Fire. So perhaps each one of you wants to say a little more about, who you are and what your role in this organization is. Shimon Edelman.
We are young. We are about 5 or 6 months old. I like to call us a collective, although probably other names apply. We are a bunch of people, some from campus, faculty, some staff, some people from the high school, young people, some townsfolks, basically united by this perceived need to make the biggest entity in town move on climate. And the biggest entity, the elephant in the room, of course, is the one on the hill. It's Cornell.
The elephant or the bear. So, Lisa Levey.
I see Cornell on Fire as really this collective or coalition, and what some of the salient characteristics to my mind are, it's really a combination of insiders and outsiders, and we can speak truth to power in a way that actually some of the insiders can't. And so I think that's kind of a powerful positioning, and it's deeply anchored in climate science, and my own, I think, angle of contribution is really around organizational change and system change. I do not have a background in environmental issues, but I live in Eco Village and moved there just about a year and a half ago, and but have spent over 25 years as an organizational consultant, mostly for companies. So I bring that expertise to the table in supporting Cornell on Fire.
So you're a group of both area people and different Cornell students, Cornell faculty, you said staff as well. Are you an official Cornell group?
We are not. We are not an official Cornell group or club or organization, although we are allied with some groups that are recognized by Cornell, student groups, the Cornell, the Climate Justice Coalition at Cornell. But no, we are proud of our independence, which allows us to speak, to write about things that folks affiliated with Cornell in this capacity are not capable of, for obvious reasons. We all know of limits on free speech. This, of course, by the way, is a year of free speech on campus. Limits imposed on staff, unofficial limits imposed on untenured faculty who can't speak up freely, probably self-imposed limits on students, graduate students, undergraduates, I'm not so sure of. But it takes an outsider who may be employed by Cornell, but does not speak in an official capacity of a Cornell employee, which I am.
I would just add, as I went to Cornell many years ago, and being back in Ithaca, and as an adult, in a different way, and whatever, very different stage of life. It's been interesting to see the reticence of both people inside Cornell and outside of Cornell to speak critically of Cornell in any way, which has been a real eye-opener for me, and quite honestly, a very hard thing to hear and see as somebody for whom it's been a very important organization in my life.
And what would you say is the mission of Cornell on Fire?
One very concrete goal is to have Cornell declare a climate emergency. And it's really to create a very just and comprehensive response to the urgency of climate change. And if I were going to put it in sort of very simple terms, we talk a lot in Cornell on Fire about doing sort of academia as usual. And we're at a point in our world, in our history, where as usual isn't so relevant anymore. And certainly Cornell is not the only university by a long shot that's struggling with this. But I think it's this idea of Cornell has enormous leverage, enormous influence in the US and the world, and to use that in a way that really helps to mitigate and respond to the reality of climate change. Shimon, you might have more to say about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess I have a clear vision. It's not a complicated one. The Cornell president has the proverbial bully pulpit. We know recently of several university presidents that spoke out on some issues, and the next week they were in front of the Congress. Imagine Martha Pollock coming the front porch of Day Hall. She doesn't have a porch, but imagine Day Hall having a porch and declaring a climate emergency with everything being seen, coming to be seen through the climate lens. The curriculum, of course, first and foremost, we are preparing generation after generation of students for a world that does not exist anymore. That has to change. And then Cornell's own operations need to change. So on our demands page on cornellonfire.org, we have, I believe, this remark. Everything should be seen, again, I'll just repeat it. Everything should be seen through this climate lens, because that's the most important issue that we face as a species. It's a global issue.
Most important and most dangerous, I suppose.
Absolutely
just
dangerous as in extinction.
Yeah.
This spells extinction. 3 degrees Celsius, billions of people will die. 3 degrees of Celsius over the average, the long-term average temperature.
And
this is not a laughing matter.
yeah, no, maybe I was going to say maybe we should explain what Celsius is, because not everybody has lived in places that use Celsius.
Yeah, well, 3 degrees Celsius, 1 degree Celsius is what, 2 point something degrees Fahrenheit. So 1.5 degrees Celsius, which used to be a goal, is what?
Two
three and a half degrees Fahrenheit, which
yeah.
doesn't sound like a lot. But first of all, this barrier has been breached. So for the last year, 365 days as of last week, the average global temperature exceeded that. If we go beyond that, that spells heat waves, for instance, in places that billions of people live in. A combination of high heat and high humidity kills what's called the wet bulb situation, wet bulb conditions, and 43 degrees Celsius, which is common in many places on the subcontinent, in India and Pakistan, combined with 80% humidity, kills people literally. We haven't adapted. We grew up as a species. We evolved to contend with cold, not with heat. So we can't stand that kind of heat. This is not just the extinction of all kinds of nice and beautiful species. This is our own extinction that we are facing.
I was just going to add a few things. I mean, some of the things, that I've read about the just warming temperature is, obviously it's catastrophic when we have wildfires and houses are burned and tornadoes, but it's really heat that is much more likely to, basic heat for older people, for anyone sort of vulnerable to that. And at a point, it doesn't matter how strong your immunity is. But I think I think that's a hard thing for us to understand as a species, like what that would really mean to be, have heat beyond our ability to handle it. And so anyway, I think we very much kind of focus on those big name things, or, more storm systems. And it's almost like the baseline stuff that is, I think, maybe the scariest of all of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a little hard when you live in Ithaca to really envisage a problem with heat.
I'm visiting our son in Washington, D.C. right now, and it wasn't that hot, but it was high 60s yesterday, and it was just crazy, like it's February here. And one of the things that we do see in Ithaca is it doesn't snow very much anymore, or there's no buildup of snow. If it does snow, it kind of immediately goes away, or very quickly.
It
So
has not so many years since there was snow. About 2 years ago, I remember a serious snow incident.
some people I think are happy to see that go, but it is interesting. I mean, we sort of at Eco Village laugh about that, but sometimes when it's nice in February, you're sort of like, oh, how wonderful. But then there's this like deep knot in your gut at the same time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think around here, weather is extremely changeable.
Mhm.
I mean, like just last year, the biggest damage was frost in May.
And oh yes, of course, the apple crops and
Yeah.
lots of other crops. Yes.
Well, there's flooding downtown. I hear that there are places now that can't get insurance because of the danger of flood.
But are required to.
Right.
So let's see, are there other specific demands?
The demands are pretty wide ranging. The way they're structured is really, there's sort of 6 main demands, but under that there's, various things. But they're the kinds of things like, you know, uh, focusing on your operational output and what carbon are you putting into the environment. And when you look at that, you look at things like, we call net neutral. There's a lot of ways, not just Cornell, that we dance around how we talk about emissions, but the earth doesn't care. So you might plant a tree, and so you're doing things that emit all this carbon, but you're planting a tree, you say, okay, I'm good. That's not really the way it works. So I think that's kind of things like that, looking at what is your actual emissions, what are you really putting out there, and making sure those are in line with your projections, and also what is called for, which is 50% reduction by 2030, which is amazingly soon. I think it's looking at things like, changing this idea of what education means to what Shimon was speaking about earlier. What does it mean to educate young people now, knowing that even in 2030, that's such a major milestone in terms of climate tipping point vulnerability. And so, how do you change the coursework to make, because no matter what you probably do, you're going to be contending with climate in a different way. It's things like pretty quite understandable, concrete, like cutting ties with fossil fuel companies, not letting fossil fuel companies fund research that is almost always biased. And those kind of very clear conflict of interest things. One of the things we're looking at is also, there's some expertise around climate issues on the Board of Trustees, but for an issue is as substantive as this one, that's a place that I think, Cornell could really make a difference. So there's a whole sort of variety of things. One other really big anchor point, I would say, for Cornell on Fire is like the how do you value, not only value, but raise up the indigenous perspective? Because in Western science, right, it's so much about credentialing. But the reality is indigenous people have cared for the land in a way that it was enduring, and we have a lot to learn from them. So, how do we really be in partnership with them and even defer to them, which is not a very Western behavior. So, I think it's sort of really root looking back at kind of root things and root causes and what are the things that we know now that can be done, and centering those over big technological stretches that are it's very unclear what is going to happen. And we're sort of betting on a lot of things that, that seems sort of a more dangerous way or not as smart a way to do things. So Shimon, you might have more to add, but I think it's from my systems perspective and my perspective as a, sort of really looking at how beliefs, systems and practices all align. It's stepping back to really reimagine things in a way that's hard. I mean, and it takes letting go of kind of things, the way things have always been. And this sense of academia as usual is, a really salient example that gets talked about at Cornell and Fire is around travel. And, in the academic world, and Shimon can speak to this far more than I can, but, you fly all over the place to go to conferences and stuff. That doesn't really square with what we're trying to accomplish around climate change issues.
Right. If I may, I would like to add to the comment about science. Well, science, in some sense, science and technology brought us to the place we are at. Of course, science has a great many benefits, but I've been researching for my last book, the one that last, the origins of science. Everyone knows about Francis Bacon and the great instauration, the scientific method and all of that. So Bacon was fond of speaking about science, about nature, sorry, in terms of a subject to be interrogated. And this thread was picked upon by Gottfried Leibniz, all big names, luminaries of science and natural philosophy. Leibniz wrote about nature being put on the rack. And then Will Durant, an American from about 100 years ago, thought he was quoting Bacon, but actually transmuted Bacon's words into not only putting nature on the rack, but referring to nature in the feminine, which really completes the picture. So we don't have to reject science. We will be in a bad shape if we reject science. But as Lisa said, the indigenous people have been the stewards of the land, not just in this place, in Turtle Island, many other places, all other places in the world. And they have been keeping it steady and going and not destroying nature, but rather being in partnership, stewardship relationship with nature. We have to learn from that. I want to add also with regard to the curriculum, I started when the collective came together, I started seeing my own task as a challenge to what we call climatize the curriculum. So I teach this bigger course, kind of medium size, 60 people. It's very technical. It's computational psychology, and twice a week for 14, 15 weeks. And I thought this is impossible to climatize because it's so technical. It's all this math and stuff. And I managed now, we are in week 6 of the semester. So 12 meetings so far. I managed to bring in climate on every lecture in this course because climate touches upon everything. So that's what we mean saying that everything should be seen through the climate lens. And this has to be done to the entire curriculum. I'm in touch with the Center for Teaching Innovation. I'll meet with those people on campus in a couple of weeks. This can be done. And I just maybe to forestall a possible wrong conclusion from what Lisa and I have been saying, we are not pessimists. We are optimists. We want to look towards a brighter future. We see a brighter future, but we have to act, because if nobody does anything about it, future will be bleak. It doesn't have to be.
Good. So you have emphasized a lot about the things that professors and researchers are doing. Does the organization have any other tactics?
I could share a few of those. I mean, one of them is we've done this investigative reporting series, which is quite powerful, which you can easily get to on the website, which the website address is cornellonfire.org. And it's looking at three sort of different foci. One is around climate justice issues. One is around, as Shimon was talking about, climatizing the curriculum and thinking about education in a different way. And the third is really looking at the operational issues, sort of where the rubber hits the road. And so educating people is a part of it. What we talk about is really sharing the complete story, because it's not that Cornell is telling you things that are untrue necessarily, but you can couch things in different ways. And so, it's natural. You want to put your best foot forward. There was a sustainability state of sustainability address that was about not even a month ago. And, we kind of all walked away from that saying, it sounds like we got this, we're doing great. And if you peel back the onion, you find out that's actually not true in a lot of ways. So if you look at even the, how emissions have changed since 2008, when we really sort of dug down, the emissions are probably, flatlined in all that time or even higher. And part of the confusion with the climate stuff, which is, again, I'm going up the learning curve a lot myself, but natural gas used to be thought of as a good option, a lower carbon option. And what we've learned through time is it's really not. So Cornell went from a coal-fueled energy supply to their own power plant, which uses natural gas. That was thought of as much better, but the truth is we've learned natural gas isn't really better, but it's still sort of labeled as a lower carbon alternative. So that's what I mean about sort of the specifics in language. And, if any people are very interested in all the technicality, it's very deep reporting on and a lot of that. And, you can see the ways that we feel like the whole story doesn't get told about what is happening in terms of Cornell's climate actions. Some of the future tactics are, I've been trying to brainstorm with an undergraduate student about creative ways to connect with students. And we're exploring this idea of having them respond to questions about things like how do they see their future relative to climate change. I think it's hard to understand the experience of somebody, for me, not at that period of life anymore, at, 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever, really trying to hold all this. And so how do we hear from students and help leadership get a window into how students feel? And a lot of them are reticent to speak, publicly. So finding ways they can do that in a way that's comfortable for them. I mentioned the board, of trustees looking at conflicts of interest. If you're on the board of a fossil fuel company, that doesn't seem aligned with the goal of saying, climate action is really, front and central for us. So there's kind of a whole array of things. The last thing I will say myself, just the experience, I don't know if, so Eco Village is an intentional community, meaning people want to live in community in a different way. So people have their own houses and everything, but it's people who want to work together around solving issues or just being connected socially, etc. and environmental is obviously a part of it. I'll just speak from my own lived experience, but things like for me, it's what I call it's much more if somebody's going to go buy something new, they'll first reach out to the community. Like I was going to go buy a new set of dumbbells because I want to, start weightlifting or something. But before I do that, does anyone have any they're not using? And that has been a really, it's small, but it's radical at the same time. Like it's a very different kind of conception of things. So that's just been a powerful personal experience for me, and seeing the ways, the idea of how do we consume less is kind of anathema to the way we do a lot of things. And I think, we look at a place like Cornell where it's very resource intensive, and there's not really any discussion about how do we stop building. We're always building new buildings, and that's what makes us seen as, progressive and stuff. So the idea of like changing demand patterns is something that doesn't even get mentioned anywhere. And that is kind of a whole new paradigm of thinking that I think will all be going down at some point.
Yeah.
And I would add here, if I might, what I see as a very important role for the town is to do away with the notion that some people on the Hill might have that the Cornell entity is extraterritorial, and start getting bringing Cornell back in line with building code and the efficiency codes and all of that. And that in itself would be a great push, because the town, it seems to me that the city is much more progressive in these senses than Cornell is. Academic institutions might be hothouses of innovation, but not in political economical matters. And so I think that's a great role that the town can play in bringing everyone on the Hill and down in the valley to a better future.
And do you have any any short-term plans for what you're going to be doing?
There is the Earth Day coming up. I think the slogan this year is, among some of the organizations participating, is Reclaiming Earth Day.
Okay, and also perhaps you could say something about how to reach you if somebody wants to join.
So cornellonfire.org is the website.
Thank you, Shimon Edelman. Thank you, Lisa Levey. This has been about Cornell on Fire. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.